In 2007, we learned that milk blocks the absorption of the phytonutrients in chocolate. In 2008, we learned that milk may completely block the beneficial effects of the phytonutrients in tea. Might as well just be drinking water. In 2009, soy milk was tested. The reason cow milk blocks the benefits of tea, we think, is because of the milk protein casein binding up all the phytonutrients. Since soy milk doesn't have casein, though, one would assume that adding soy milk to tea is fine, but you never know until you run the experiment. What do you think? Soy milk blocks the benefits of tea, fact or fiction? Let's look at the data. This is measuring the beneficial effects on arterial cells in a Petri dish. Here's the control, plain water. Then comes the plain black tea, no creamer, and as you can see, the spike in beneficial effects that appear to be completely blocked by milk. Then they tried 3 different types of soy milk, sweetened, calcium-enriched, and unsweetened, all of which had the same effect as milk. Fact: vascular effects of tea are suppressed by soy milk. Now, this was in vitro, in a Petri dish. We don't know if this translates into actual people, but until we do know more, I encourage folks to drink their tea straight. And as I've noted in previous volumes, green tea is healthier than black. What's so special about green tea? Asked my medical alma mater in their health and nutrition letter. Well, in just the last 12 months, we've learned 2 cups a day may drop our stroke risk 70%, may halve our risk of dying from pneumonia, and keep us from losing our teeth. 3 cups a day, started 6 weeks before pollen season, significantly reduces allergy symptoms, and 4 cups a day may decrease our risk of diabetes, in part because tea may be useful in the prevention of obesity. Considered nature's defense against malignancies, at least according to Dr. Butt, and it may even help if we're bitten by a venomous snake. Can your coffee do all that? According to the head of Tufts Antioxidant Research Laboratory, we can think of tea as a plant food, much like fruits and vegetables. In fact, green tea may explain the so-called Asian paradox. Why do people in Asian countries, where smoking remains more popular, suffer heart disease and lung cancer at the same rate as Americans? The phytonutrients in green tea may be partly responsible by maintaining artery function, inhibiting clots, and blocking tumor growth. What's the healthiest way to prepare green tea? Recently in Taiwan, a new trend has arisen of cold steeping tea. Not like iced tea where you make it hot, then cool it down, but you start with cold water, throw the tea in, put it in the fridge for 2 hours, or just leave it at room temp. It's supposed to have less caffeine, reduce bitterness, and I'm sure it does, but cold water probably also doesn't draw out many of the antioxidants either. I mean, that's the whole point of brewing tea with hot water, right? To extract the nutrition. We shouldn't presume, though, and so scientists in Italy took it upon themselves to compare the antioxidant activity of cold versus hot steeped tea. Here's the data for hot tea. This is measuring the lag time before cholesterol oxidizes. You mix LDL, bad cholesterol, with an oxidizing agent like copper in this case, and it takes about 28 minutes to oxidize. But you add tea, and the oxidants slow down the oxidation and increase the lag time. That's a good thing. And as you can see, oolong tea is better than black, green is better than oolong, and white is the best overall. But this is the antioxidant activity for hot brewed tea. And a surprise upset, cold steeped tea was even better, significantly better. So much so that cold steeped black may even be healthier than hot brewed white. Why? Well, the only thing they could think of is that hot water is so hot that it destroys some of the catechins, the antioxidants in tea. So I no longer brew my tea. I just throw it in cold water. Saves time, saves energy, and we now know it's even healthier. Who cares how much nutrition is extracted from tea leaves, though, if you eat the leaves themselves? We know that drinking tea is good for you. What about eating it? Matcha, powdered green tea, invented in China about 1,000 years ago, transplanted to Japan. Whole leaves of tea milled into fine powder. You dump a spoonful of water, and then drink the whole thing down. Now, it Sounds like a good idea. Why waste nutrition throwing away tea leaves when you're done, when you can drink them whole? Or were tea leaves just not meant to be eaten? Powdered green tea leaves. Harmful, harmless, or helpful? Super helpful and easy. Carry around little packets of matcha wherever you go. Just dump them in your water bottle. You add 0 calories. At the same time, you're adding whopping loads of nutrition. I carry them around wherever I go. Never leave home without it. Now, to significantly extend our lifespan, the latest research suggests one would have to drink 7 cups of tea a day, which raises the question, how much is too much? Sometimes you can get too much of a good thing, even water. Last year, for example, a jury awarded $16 million to a family whose mom died of water intoxication, trying to win her family a Nintendo. Some radio jocks came up with the idea for a Hold Your Wii for a Wii contest. Whoever could drink the most water wins. Jennifer came in second, before she keeled over dead. So you can overdo anything. How much tea is too much? Is the safe upper limit around 5 cups a day, 10 cups, 15, 20, or can one safely drink 25 cups of tea a day? The limiting factor is probably the fluoride levels in tea. There was a case recently reported of a woman developing fluoride toxicity from tea. How much did she drink? 1 to 2 gallons of double-strength tea every day of her adult life. That's the equivalent of about 30 to 60 cups of regular tea a day. That's definitely too much. Based on a new analysis of fluoride levels in 5 brands of bottled tea, I would recommend people not drink more than 10 cups of tea a day. From the healthiest beverage to the healthiest food. Dark green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, cabbage family vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, collards, kale. How could one possibly eat too much kale? Well, there are natural goitrogenic compounds in this family of vegetables that can interfere with thyroid function in people with marginal iodine intake. They can block the thyroid's uptake of iodine, but the answer is not to avoid these super-healthy foods, just to get enough iodine in our diet, as I've detailed in past volumes. Still, though, you can overdo anything. How much is too much? I specify raw here because an enzyme that releases these compounds is deactivated by cooking, so you don't have to worry about eating cooked cruciferous. But how much raw is too much? How many cups of coleslaw a day is too much, for example? 5 cups a day, 10, 15, 20, or can you go up to 25 cups of coleslaw a day, every day, for months at a time? The New England Journal of Medicine. Coma-induced by raw bok choy. She was eating about 3 pounds a day every day, which means 15 cups a day is definitely too much. In the 2 months before she was admitted to the intensive care unit in respiratory failure, she had consumed about 1,000 cups of raw bok choy. Now, each cruciferous vegetable has a different amount of these compounds, so you could probably get away with theoretically 50 cups of raw cauliflower a day, but just 3 cups of raw mustard greens a day is too much. In previous volumes, I've talked about the benefits of coffee consumption, but what about during pregnancy? How much is too much? Should we not drink any and just stick to water? Or can you get away with a short, tall, venti, or grande brewed coffee every day? Our review was published last year, and they recommend to stay under 300 milligrams of caffeine a day, so a daily grande is too much. Last year, we learned that iron supplements were harmful. But what about for pregnant women? It's a chief component of most prenatal vitamins. Now, this is for non-anemic women. Obviously, if you're iron deficient, no matter who you are, you may need extra iron. But if your blood count's okay, is supplemental iron during pregnancy harmful, harmless, or helpful? It's harmful. Non-anemic pregnant women should not take iron supplements. But why? Increases the risk of low birth weight, preterm birth, and maternal high blood pressure. In fact, during the first trimester, your body dramatically curtails iron absorption naturally. Maybe, this researcher is suggesting, it's your body's way of trying to protect the baby. Your body can only control the absorption of plant iron, though. Blood iron, so-called heme iron, from animal sources cannot be controlled by your body. It goes straight through the gut, and could inadvertently, we could get too much of it. Folic acid supplements, which are recommended for all women of childbearing age to prevent birth defects. Harmful, harmless, or helpful? In other words, vitamin and panacea or genetic time bomb. I do not recommend folic acid supplements. I recommend folate, from the same word root as foliage, found in dark green leafy vegetables and legumes. But everybody knows no one eats greens and beans every day, so the government started fortifying our food supply with folic acid in 1998. Folic acid, though, is not the same thing as folate, but it's cheaper and more stable in pill form, and so that's why they use it instead. In fact, folic acid is a synthetic chemical not found in nature at all, but studies on rats found that there's an enzyme in the liver that basically changes it into the natural form. Studies keep coming out, though, linking folic acid supplementation with diseases like breast cancer and colon cancer. So yes, it lowers the risk of birth defects, but may raise our risk of cancer. But wait a second, spinach and doesn't raise our risk of cancer. Beans and greens lower the risk of both birth defects and cancer. It was a big mystery until last year, when scientists figured out we're not rats. It's hard to study human livers because people tend to need them, but sometimes an organ donor dies and there's no one to take the liver, and so scientists were finally able to see what happens in rat livers actually happens in human livers. And it turns out that the enzyme that converts folic acid in pills into something our body can actually use is 50 times less active than in rats, less than 2% of the activity we thought it had, based on the animal studies. So because our enzyme is extremely slow, people who take folic acid pills have lots of this synthetic folic acid circulating in their bodies, and that's what we think may be behind the elevated cancer risk, whereas beans and greens every day offer the best of both worlds. But sellers of supplements like to argue that we have to take vitamin pills because the nutrient content of our crops has declined over the last 50 years due to soil depletion. Is that true? The nutrient content of our food is in decline. Fact or fiction? It's a fact, but by how much, though? On average, over the last 50 years, have the nutrients declined just a little, 1 to 20%, 20 to 40, or have we lost half the nutrition? Do we have to eat like twice as many carrots these days as we would have in the 1950s to get the same amount of nutrition? Or is it even worse, and the majority of the nutrients have disappeared? We've only lost about 15% on average across 43 different crops. So instead of eating 6 florets of broccoli, eat 7. You may have seen headlines like this, suggesting that infection with certain viruses can contribute to obesity. According to a new review published this year, viral obesity, fact or fiction? It all started about 20 years ago. A never-before-described poultry virus emerged, killing thousands of chickens. That's par for the course. But the strange thing about the new virus is that the survivors became fat. Normally when you survive a serious viral infection, you lose weight, but infection with this virus made them gain 50% more abdominal fat than uninfected birds. This was the first virus ever discovered that could cause obesity. And the virus was spread through feces, so you put one fat-infected chicken in a room, and then all the chickens became fat and infected. The kicker is that it didn't happen by boosting their appetite or something. They ate the same amount of food, but the virus just made them start piling on tummy fat anyway. So researchers immediately started taking blood samples from overweight people to see if they were infected with the chicken virus. They found that not only do 1 in 5 obese humans test positive for exposure to the virus, those exposed to the virus weighed 33 pounds heavier than those that weren't exposed. This is in kilograms. Those positive for the virus averaged about 210 pounds. Those testing negative for the virus were only 177 pounds, 33 pounds different. Infectobesity, obesity of infectious origin. So where does this leave us? The recognized risk factors of obesity include overindulgence, lack of exercise, lifestyle, food habits, environment, stress, heredity, genetic factors. All these factors are components of a multifactorial model of obesity. The current evidence adds to our knowledge that viral infection could probably be considered another component cause, although not a necessary cause of obesity in humans, meaning you can be fat on your own with no help needed from some chicken virus. But it may be a contributing factor. Maybe one reason why, for many people, the pounds just don't seem to come off. Maybe that's one of the reasons why, in a study of 40,000 men and women last year, one of the foods most closely tied to expanding waistlines was poultry. Of course, that may just be because chickens these days are mostly fat, up to 3 times more fat than protein. See, now we confine animals genetically, manipulate them, pump them full of growth hormones, deny them exercise. How fat have our chickens got? You're not going to believe this. According to the USDA, 100 years ago, a serving of chicken used to have only 16 calories. That's half the calories of a brown rice cake. Now, one serving of chicken has over 200 calories, like eating a scoop of ice cream. The fat went from less than 2 grams to 23 grams of animal fat per serving, twice as much fat than ice cream. So now chicken has 10 times more fat, 10 times more calories. So that could explain why chicken has been so tied to human abdominal girth. No viral explanation is necessary. In fact, the chickens themselves may be technically obese, raising the concern, does eating obesity cause obesity in the consumer? A chicken carcass now contains 2 to 3 times the energy coming from fat compared with protein. And parents may think they're feeding their children a low-fat product, as it was when they were kids, but are instead unknowingly feeding their chicken on a high-fat product. The cocktail of gene selection for fast weight gain, lack of exercise, high-energy food available 24 hours a day, is a simple and well-understood recipe for obesity in these birds. Farm animals used to make DHA, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acid important for the brain, but fast-growing animals fail to fully synthesize it in muscle. This reversal in fatty acid status in intensively reared chickens is described as a most unusual new phenomenon. It is likely to be the result of genetic selection for fast growth outstripping the biosynthetic process. To obtain the same amount of DHA from intensively reared chickens today as would have been obtained in the 1970s, one would be required to eat 6 whole chickens. That's like 9,000 calories. These researchers at the Institute for Brain Chemistry go as far as to suggest that this may in part be why we've seen skyrocketing human mental illness. Although the intensification of chickens alone cannot be responsible for this rise in brain disorders, they consider it part of the package of changes in our food system that has ignored human nutrition. Only 1 in 10 of the cells in your body is human. The other 90% are bacteria. We have about 100 trillion of them on us and in us. The human colon is considered the most biodense ecosystem in the world. We're just like along for the ride. We exist as one big superorganism, in a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship, usually. Collectively, our gut bacteria weigh as much as one of our kidneys, and are as metabolically active as our liver. They affect our immune system. We just found out that if you give probiotics to kids, they don't get sick as much. Our gut bacteria affect our hormonal balance, and they can affect our energy balance as well. Is obesity linked to our gut flora? There are some species of bacteria better at extracting calories from our feces than others. Pooped calories end up in the toilet rather than on our hips. But there's certain obesity-associated bacteria with an increased capacity for energy harvest. Our bodies are trying to get rid of fecal matter, but certain bacteria in our colon can take our waste, break it down further, and release calories that are then absorbed back into our bloodstream. So here our body is trying to get rid of it all, and the calories are bouncing right back. Now, this was originally all based on mouse studies, so we really didn't know what to think, but finally this year we have some human data, and indeed, the type of bacteria in our guts is related to body weight and weight gain. That got some researchers in Austria thinking. Maybe one of the reasons vegetarians are so much slimmer on average is because their diets foster more of the lean-type bacteria rather than the obese type. And that's exactly what they found. They took a bunch of fecal samples from vegetarians, did some DNA fingerprinting, compared it to omnivore feces, and found significantly more of the lean-type bacteria, suggesting a smaller capacity for energy gain from food in vegetarians. How much smaller? Perhaps 2% of daily caloric intake. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it just happens automatically, while we sleep even, and adds up over time. Over a year, that may come out to about 5 pounds of fat. That may not sound like a lot either, but that's exactly how much people tend to put on annually during the midlife years. So that could explain why, as we've gone over before, those eating vegetarian don't seem to get that age-related weight gain that afflicts the rest of the population. 2 years ago, I presented a mystery. Long-term adherence to a diet that includes meat even just once a week or more was associated with a 74% increase in the odds of getting diabetes relative to long-term adherence to a zero-meat diet. Just a single serving of any type of meat or more a week was associated with dramatically increased risk. This makes sense, though. Eating vegetarian helps lose weight, losing weight helps you avoid diabetes, so what's the mystery? Even after controlling for weight change, weekly meat intake remained an important factor for diabetes. So even at the exact same weight, eating meat weekly significantly increases our risk of diabetes. So there must be a more direct factor, and this year we got closer to an answer. Your body's smart. It knows that high levels of circulating steroid sex hormones in the bloodstream can be deleterious, increasing our risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, other disorders like diabetes. So our bodies produce a sex hormone binding globulin, a protein your body makes that takes excess hormones out of circulation. The more hormone-binding proteins we have, the lower our risk of these diseases. That's where a plant-based diet comes in. Sex hormone binding levels were significantly higher by more than half in vegetarian women compared to omnivore women, and higher concentrations have been shown to be associated with a favorable metabolic profile, as well as reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes. So this may explain why even when vegetarians are overweight, they don't suffer the same rate of diabetes that meat eaters do. We've known for over a decade that women who eat meat have the highest levels of estrogenic hormones in their bloodstream, and vegans the lowest, but maybe that's just because vegans are so much slimmer. This year, the consumption of animal products was definitively linked to the levels of circulating steroid hormones in the blood, regardless of body fat levels. The reason we're concerned is that the increased consumption of animal-derived food may have adverse effects on the development of hormone-dependent cancers. Among dietary risk factors, these investigators were most concerned about milk and dairy products, because the milk we drink today is produced from pregnant cows, in which estrogen and progesterone levels are markedly elevated. That may be why milk drinkers have 5 times the rates of twins compared to vegans. That's how much an effect dairy can have on our hormones. A landmark study was published this year in an international pediatrics journal on just how much estrogen we're exposed to when we drink milk, given that the majority of commercial milk comes from pregnant cows. During the 60s and 70s, genetic manipulations of dairy cows enabled them to lactate throughout almost their entire pregnancies. That's why commercial cow's milk these days contains large amounts of estrogens and progesterone. During the same period, there's been a dramatic increase in estrogen-dependent malignant diseases, such as ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, breast cancer, testicular cancer, and prostate cancer. Eating and drinking estrogen is not just a problem for women. Research shows that among various food items, cow's milk and cheese had the highest correlation with the incidence and mortality rates of these male cancers as well. Especially for prepubescent children, there is particular concern about exposure to exogenous estrogens in commercial milk produced from pregnant cows. So what they did is have young men ages 19 through 21 and children ages 7 through 9 try to chug a quart of cow's milk in under 10 minutes. This is what happened to the men. The levels of the pregnancy estrogen estrone started to shoot up 60% within an hour of drinking the milk, and their testosterone levels significantly dropped. There are men who don't want to drink soy milk because they have an irrational fear of phytoestrogens, even though soy does not have feminizing effects on men. Yet they're perfectly willing to drink cow's milk, which has actual estrogens in it. Within 1 hour of the milk hitting their intestines, estrogen levels go significantly up, and testosterone levels go significantly down. What about the children? Same thing, but even more dramatic, because they start out with such low levels. Within 1 hour of drinking cow milk, the level of sex steroid hormones in their little bodies more than triples, and half the kids couldn't even finish the whole quart. Why should we care? Because some of these powerful estrogens could be categorized as carcinogens, and milk is a rich source of these hormones and concentrates in mammary drainage. Never seem to see that in the advertisements. The corresponding suppression in testosterone secretion means that men are certainly affected by commercial cow's milk, and height, growth, and sexual maturation of young children could also be affected by normal intake of cow's milk. As I talked about in the last volume, recent surveys on the onset of puberty show an alarming trend of earlier sexual maturation in girls. During the same time period, exposure to exogenous, meaning external estrogens, through intake of commercial milk produced from pregnant cows has spread around the world. They think that this intake of pregnant cow's milk is one of the major causes of early sexual maturation in young children. This relationship between estrogens in pregnant cow's milk and sexual maturation in children must be acknowledged as an important theme. In Volume 3, I talk about the link between these hormones in dairy and the stimulation of sebaceous glands resulting in acne, but as we're learning, the growth of acne is not the only thing the hormones of milk can stimulate the growth of. Acne, dairy, and cancer, published last year in the journal Dermatoendocrinology. A potent link to dairy seems to exist for acne, breast cancer, and prostate cancer, but why? Maybe it's 5-alpha-P. What is 5-alpha-P? 5-alpha-pregnanidione, another sex steroid hormone present in cow's milk that is a direct precursor to a testosterone metabolite that not only drives acne, but may promote both prostate and breast cancer, like the other dairy hormones. The article starts out how, over the last 35 years, parts of a highly important jigsaw puzzle have gradually come to light. First, look, all any doctor has to do is take a medical history to learn that, for example, extensive back acne is almost exclusively due to excess dairy intake. Not necessarily milk itself, could be other dairy products. Now, we'd like to do controlled clinical studies, but the problem is there's no control. Dairy without the offending hormones does not exist. Even organic milk, where they're not allowed to inject the cows with extra hormones, has growth hormones in it, because biologically that's the whole point of milk, right? To put a couple 100 pounds on a baby calf. The problem with humans drinking cow hormones is there's no natural feedback loop. For our own hormones, if we have too much estrogen or something, our brain damps it down. But this protective feedback system is bypassed when the system is invaded by these dihydrotestosterone precursors in dairy products. See, the human endocrine system didn't evolve under the influence of ingested dairy and other external hormones and growth factors, and we're just not equipped to cope with such a quote-unquote sneak attack. In summary, the evidence suggests that dairy-sourced hormones, not being subject to any innate feedback inhibition, may be the source of the steroid sex hormones that drive acne, prostate, and breast cancer. This is the most promising unifying hypothesis or theory available to explain the cause of diverse conditions that blemish, scar, shorten, and take the lives of millions. Some hormones we do implant in farm animals, though. Last year, Japanese researchers were lamenting the dramatic increase in hormone-dependent cancers in their country. 4 times more breast and ovarian cancer, 8 times more endometrial cancer, and 10 times more prostate cancer just in the last 25 years. They suspect it might be because they import so much hormone-laden beef from the United States. But just because we implant cattle with hormones doesn't mean it actually makes it into the meat. We inject these hormone implants into the ears of cattle, but the ears get chopped off at slaughter. So the U.S. beef industry argues that the hormones don't get into the meat. But these researchers were suspicious, so they compared the hormone levels in American beef to Japanese beef, where they don't commonly inject cattle with hormones. They found up to 600 times the level of estrogens in American beef. So they got the feeling that the increase in consumption of estrogen-rich beef following steroid implantation might facilitate estrogen accumulation in the human body, and could be related to the incidence of hormone-dependent cancers, although further studies are required. For example, eggs may be the greatest source of estrogens in a person's normal diet. Why would estrogen-rich beef lead to prostate cancer? You think of that more related to male hormones like testosterone. We inject cattle with that too. Just like athletes can use doping agents in sports to build up their muscles, in the livestock industry, anabolic steroids are given to cattle to beef up their muscles. We don't just give estrogens, we implant anabolic male steroids with brand names like Magnoid, Steroid, some of which contain androgens like testosterone. Where are these hormones found the most? Researchers in Iran last year compared the levels of testosterone in the meat, liver, and testicles of sheep. What did they find? Interestingly, though testicles produce testosterone, they don't store it, and so it builds up elsewhere in the body. In fact, the levels of anabolic steroids in meat can be so high that studies have shown that athletes who eat certain kinds of meat can be falsely accused of abusing steroids. As with dairy, eating meat may also affect prepubescent children, boosting their production of male sex hormones in both boys and girls, which may hasten the first appearance of pubic hair between ages 6 and 8. Even though the effect was small, the fact that it's a modifiable factor, something you can change about your child's diet, makes it potentially relevant. Besides hormones, what else is in a burger? Published in the Annals of Diagnostic Pathology, anatomic pathologists at the Cleveland Clinic recently dissected burgers to see what was inside. Fast food hamburgers. What are we really eating? We eat 5 billion burgers a year, and most consumers presume that the hamburgers they eat is comprised primarily of meat. But what did they actually find? They analyzed burgers from 8 different fast food joints and found them to contain the same tissues observed in hot dogs. That's probably not a good sign. They found blood vessels, nerves, cartilage, and swarms of these little parasites in burgers from 1/4 of the fast food restaurants they sampled. No brains, though. That's good. But so how much was actually meat? What percentage of a fast food burger is actually muscle flesh, as opposed to these other tissues and parasites and fillers and everything? Meat content in the hamburgers ranged from 2% to 14.8%. 2% meat, they're practically vegetarian. Part of that other 85 to 98% that wasn't meat, ammonia. Thanks to some excellent investigative reporting, we learned last year that a company developed a novel technique for killing all the fecal bacteria, injecting beef with ammonia. The meat industry loved it so much it became a multi-billion-dollar industry and made its way into the majority of hamburgers sold nationwide. McDonald's, Burger King, and millions of pounds every year given to our kids at school. This is what the process looks like. It produces what one USDA microbiologist called pink slime, saying it doesn't even consider the stuff to be meat. And when the USDA says something isn't meat, not even good enough for prisoners in Georgia. They sent it back because the meatloaf stank like window cleaner. Why would they feed this to school children? School lunch officials said they ultimately agreed to use the treated meat because it shaved about 3 cents off the cost of making a pound of ground beef. 3 cents. What's the big deal about what kids eat? Well, for one thing, the type of protein children eat, particularly at preschool age, 5 to 6 years old, the critical window, appears to determine when they start puberty. Kids eating lots of animal protein at that age, meat, eggs, and dairy, prematurely start puberty a year earlier than those eating lots of plant protein, an entire year earlier. Why do we care? Cancer and mortality. Early puberty means, on average, a shorter lifespan. One reason kids may not be eating healthier is that maybe their parents overestimate the quality of their child's diet. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, if they think their kids are already eating well, then there's no reason to change. For the first time ever, this theory was actually tested. The mothers of 2,000 preschoolers were interviewed. What percentage of moms insisted that their child's diet was good? The vast majority. What percentage of their kids' diet were actually good? Now, note this is in accordance with the USDA healthy eating guidelines, which aren't exactly strict, but let's look. Only 0.2%, 1 in every 500 kids. The vast majority of mothers overestimate the quality of their child's diet. There's a parasitic worm in fish called Anisakis. This year we learned that about 2/3 of retail fish samples came up positive for them. This is what they look like. They're really quite small, actually. You can see 2 here kind of peeking out of some sushi. Because people eat fish raw, parasites are always a concern, but the unique thing about these worms is that our bodies can be so sensitive to them that the worms can trigger an allergic reaction dead or alive, even if they're cooked. So we're finding some people that are allergic to fish really aren't. They're allergic to the dead worms in the fish. In fact, because we feed so much fish meal to chickens, you can have an allergic reaction to a parasitic fish worm and not even eat fish at all. Not to worry, though, our fish may have Benadryl in it. Because so many drugs are excreted in our urine, when we pee them down the toilet, they can end up polluting our rivers and streams and the flesh of the fish swimming in them. In fish fillets, they found Benadryl, Cardizem, Tegretol, Lopid, Zoloft, and Prozac metabolites. The levels they found were really low, but what if these compounds bioaccumulate in tissue or have unintended consequences from the complex mixtures of contaminants we're exposed to? Every 5 years, our government measures the amount of dioxins in our food supply. Dioxins are toxic waste pollutants spewed out into the atmosphere that accumulate in the fatty tissues of humans and food animals consumed by humans. The most significant exposure to dioxin-like compounds is thought to be dietary intake of animal and fish products. But which ones are the worst? Using data from the EPA published last year, is there more toxic waste in beef, cheese, chicken, eggs, fish, lamb, or pork? Well, when you hear toxic waste in diet, the first thing we should think of is fish, and indeed that was by far the worst. But what's second worst? Second only to fish in terms of dioxin levels, eggs, with cheese the runner-up. That's why we got to be careful. I mean, if you're breastfeeding, for example, then you can reduce infant exposure by avoiding fish. But if you replace that fish with some other food group containing chemicals like dioxins in dairy products, then you might not be doing your baby any favors. And we now know that eggs have about 3 times as much as dairy. This may explain this new study, Egg Consumption and the Risk of Cancer, which found that just a half an egg a day or more was associated with about twice the odds of getting mouth cancer, throat cancer, esophageal cancer, and voice box cancer. 3 times the odds of getting colon cancer, about twice the odds of rectal cancer and lung cancer, 3 times the odds of getting breast cancer, just eating half an egg a day or more, and about twice the odds of prostate cancer, bladder cancer, and all cancers combined. This is from a study last year that measured the amounts of PCBs, DDT, other dioxins, and pesticides inside people's bodies, both male and female, infants, children, teens, adults, and the elderly. The red line represents what the EPA considers to be the level at which there's significantly increased cancer risk. Was there any age group that exceeded that level? Let's look at the results. Every single age group, 10 times that benchmark level of PCBs, the red bar, especially in the bodies of young children, and DDT levels right about at that cancer level across the board. How are we still exposed to DDT? I mean, wasn't it banned decades ago after Silent Spring came out? Yeah, but it's still polluting the environment. As the CDC points out, we're primarily exposed to meat, fish, and dairy, though thankfully the levels in the U.S. continue to decline. A commentary in a journal called Reproductive Toxicology last year summarized the rather grim situation. Contemporary reproductive-age women and their offspring are facing an unprecedented onslaught of toxicant exposures from myriad sources in their day-to-day life. And it's not just cancer we're worried about. Increasing evidence suggests that maternal exposure to toxic chemical compounds may be associated with various birth defects, pediatric problems, skewed gender ratios, lethal cancers in children and teens, psychosexual challenges, as well as reproductive and hormonal dysfunction in later life. The author concludes, I anticipate that future generations of scientists will look back with disbelief at a medical culture that permitted poisoning of reproductive-age women and ignored ramifications to unborn children. One of the difficulties in doing nutrition research is to try to accurately assess what people eat. Not what they say they eat, or not what we eat during a 3-day food record where someone basically follows us around with a clipboard, but what we actually eat on average when no one's looking. That's why scientists love biomarkers, things you can actually physically measure in the blood or urine to tell how much of a certain food someone is eating. So, for example, there are these unique phytonutrients in cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, kale, collards that help prevent cancer. But you can't just ask people if they eat their greens, because people want to look good, and so they fib a little. Well, not anymore, though. Now there's a urine test you can do to see if people are actually telling the truth. Some employers test for drugs. Now you can test for greens, like a broccoli breathalyzer. The important thing is that now researchers can more accurately measure intake. Last year, scientists discovered a biomarker for fish consumption, like a tuna test. They take a sample of your blood, and without asking you a single question about your diet, can tell how much fish you've been eating. What's the biomarker? Arsenic. Arsenic turned out to be the best indicator. Blood arsenic appears to be a useful biomarker for total fish and seafood intake. Now, this was last year, 2009. This year, scientists may have come up with even better biomarkers for fish consumption: dioxins, PCBs, and mercury. The most important fish consumption biomarkers were dioxins and PCBs for men, and mercury among women. A tighter correlation than even omega-3 levels. You can tell how much fish people eat by the amount of arsenic and toxic waste circulating in their bloodstream. In fact, you can even take a hair off of someone's hairbrush and tell how much fish that person has been eating by the mercury content in their hair. This was a study done on children's hair clippings. Your whole body gets contaminated with the stuff. Fact or fiction? Fish oil decreases inflammation. It better, it's the whole reason people take it. But it's not true. No effect of fish oil supplementation on inflammatory markers. This randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled intervention trial showed no effect of a whopping dose of fish oil on markers of inflammation in the blood. If anything, there was a trend that all serum inflammatory markers tended to increase after fish oil. Wait a second, the whole reason people are told to eat fish, told to take fish oil, is that the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, like DHA, are anti-inflammatory. So there must be something in the fish oil counteracting the good stuff and increasing inflammation, and it's likely the industrial pollutants such as PCBs and insecticides. We now know that PCBs can induce the kind of inflammation that promotes obesity and heart disease. It's the same reason polar bears are now suffering from chronic inflammation, the industrial contaminants in our oceans that build up in fat. And so when we swallow capsules containing straight fish fat, it puts us at the same tenuous polar bear position at the top of the food chain. So what about distilled fish oil? You'll see things like this: molecularly distilled for maximum purity. Well, researchers put fish oil distillation to the test last year. Fact or fiction? Fish oil is safe, but only if it's distilled. Fiction, it's not safe. They found the same PCBs and insecticides, even in supposedly PCB-free fish oil, and the exact same levels of other industrial pollutants. The bottom line? This suggests that the commercial molecular distillation treatment used for removal of toxic contaminants is only effective for some of the contaminants. So, they conclude, they have to balance the trade-off between risks and benefits, especially given how ineffective current fish oil treatments are at removing some of these contaminants. That's why I recommend the algae-based DHA, a win-win for humans, so you can get the benefits without any of the risk. Because our oceans are so polluted, even when you buy distilled fish oil, you can't get off the hook. The dramatic rise in obesity has been blamed on overeating and inactivity, but might it be something more? I talked about the chicken obesity virus. Scientists are now identifying industrial chemical pollutants released into the environment in the last few decades that can disrupt our metabolism and predispose us to obesity. These pollutants have been called obesogens. The existence of chemical obesogens suggests that the prevailing paradigm, which holds that diet and decreased physical activity alone are the causative triggers for the burgeoning epidemic of obesity, should be reassessed, which is what scientists are doing now. The focus has been on these organotin compounds. Basically, they turn pre-adipocytes, pre-fat cells, into fat cells. How are we exposed? Through our diet. Where are these obesogens found the most? Beans, dairy, fish, fruit, grains, meat, nuts, or veggies. There is actually some in conventionally grown fruits and veggies, because some of these chemicals are used as fungicides. But the number one dietary source is fish. Again, you hear the word pollutant, you think fish. As oceans have become humanity's sewers. Everything eventually flows down into the sea. What is the impact of adopting a vegan diet on the concentrations of organochlorines in the blood? What are organochlorines? Organochlorines are chemical products that were widely used after World War II as insecticides and in industry. In the 1960s, their adverse effects for the environment and human health began to be known, and in the 1970s their use was banned in most industrialized countries, including the United States. However, because they're so resistant to degradation, many of these persistent organic pollutants continue to be present in most food chains worldwide. Furthermore, because they are attracted to fat, these chemicals accumulate in the fat tissue of organisms. Being at the top of the food chain, humans are contaminated via food in infancy from what their moms ate, and later from animal products such as fish, meat, and dairy products. But vegans don't eat any animal products, which are the main source of these toxic pollutants. So their exposure to these compounds should theoretically be lower than that of non-vegetarians. There are studies showing lower concentrations of the breast milk or fat tissue of vegetarians, but what about vegans? They found that vegans were significantly less polluted than omnivores, regarding a whole list of carcinogenic industrial toxins and pesticides, even after controlling for age and weight, which makes the difference in contamination even more dramatic because, of course, the vegans had less body fat. What surprised the researchers was that the vegans had as much as they did. Here's the data. As you can see, there's certainly lower levels among vegans compared to omnivores, but why isn't there an even bigger spread? The researchers offered a number of explanations. The vegans may have been breastfed as infants and thus exposed to organochlorines accumulated by their mother, which are then transferred to her baby at the time of lactation. And most vegans aren't vegan from birth. Becoming vegetarian or vegan is often a decision made in adulthood. Thus, the omnivore diet followed during childhood and adolescence results in a contamination by accumulated organochlorine compounds. And in addition, vegans may, on rare occasions, depart from their diet and eat some animal products and contaminate themselves that way. Before vegans get cocky, though, floppy ears are cute on a bunny. Not so cute on your spinal cord. The inverted rabbit ear sign. See how it kind of looks like an upside-down bunny with floppy ears? Well, that's not what your spinal cord is supposed to look like. Why did this woman have spastic ataxic quadriparesis, a sensory polyneuropathy, and diffuse spinal cord swelling? Because she was a strict vegetarian lady. I assume they meant strictly vegetarian? Maybe she was quite the disciplinarian. Either way, people eating plant-based diets must take vitamin B12. Reports continue to pour in from all over the world, whether you're a vegetariana estricta, streng vegana, or eating vegetarian. You'd have to be crazy not getting your B12. Literally, 31-year-old stock trader turned paranoid psychotic, but not because he was schizophrenic, because he was vegan and didn't eat B12 fortified foods or take a B12 supplement. Suffered for 3 years before his doctors figured it out. Kiss me, I'm vegan. No, thank you. 41-year-old woman vegan for 2.5 years without B12. Kiss a vegetarian and taste the difference before and after she took her B12. Cleared up in no time. Vegans taste better when they take their B12. Last year we learned, in a study of Buddhist nuns, that long-term vegans for up to 72 years straight, had clinically equivalent bone mineral density, despite milk-drinking women getting twice as much calcium in their daily diet. This year there was a 200-page review published on health indicators in people eating vegetarian long-term. What about protein status? Both vegans and meat-eaters on average get the recommended amount of protein in their daily diets. Meat-eaters eat about 20% more protein a day, though, but do they achieve significantly higher levels of protein in their blood? Who has higher plasma protein levels? 3 choices: vegans higher, meat-eaters higher, or both the same protein levels. Despite 20% less protein in their daily diets, vegans actually had significantly higher plasma albumin, the predominant protein in the blood, though inflammation suppresses protein production in the liver, so this is more likely just an indicator of how much less inflammation there is in the bodies of those eating vegan. Is protein bad to the bone? The thought is that dietary protein creates a metabolic acid load that has to be buffered by calcium from the bones, and so someone who eats a lot of protein, particularly animal protein, which has a higher acid-forming sulfur content, is basically peeing their bones down the toilet. Is this fact or fiction? We used to think it's fact, but now we know the best science says it's fiction. In 1973, scientists discovered that we have specific receptors in our brain for opiate drugs like heroin and morphine. Since we didn't evolve shooting up, it stood to reason that there were natural compounds produced by our bodies that fit into those receptors. So we went looking, discovered them, and named them endogenous morphines, or endorphins for short, and endorphins are good. They are natural pain relievers, released during exercise, the consumption of spicy food, and orgasm. So there are healthier ways to stimulate these receptors than shooting up heroin. In 1990, scientists discovered that we have specific receptors in our brain for the active ingredient in marijuana as well, cannabinoids like THC. Since we didn't evolve toking up, it stood to reason there were natural compounds produced by our bodies that fit into those receptors, so we went looking, discovered them, and named them endocannabinoids, endogenous cannabinoids. And endocannabinoids are good. They're one of our body's ways to ease nausea, ease pain, generally chill us out. The question is there a way to get the good without the bad, stimulate these receptors without smoking marijuana? What's so bad about smoking marijuana? Lung cancer. Smoking just a single joint is like smoking an entire pack of cigarettes. The worst death I ever experienced in my medical career, the one that gives me the most nightmares, was a lung cancer victim gasping for breath, being drowned by their tumors. It was hideous. Please don't smoke anything. Smoke inhalation is bad no matter what the source. Thankfully, researchers discovered food this year that stimulates cannabinoid receptors, so you can get the benefits without the risks. Which food was it? Was it broccoli, coconuts, garlic, green tea, mushrooms, or tomatoes? It was the tea. Speaking of chilling out, there's a stereotype. The angry vegetarian. Who wants to eat healthy if it'll just make you cranky? Well, a new study was just released on the emotional health and mood states of vegetarians. We know about the physical health benefits, but might that come at the cost of their mental health, particularly with regard to mood? They used two psychological tests, what's called a profile of mood states, looking at depression, anger, hostility, fatigue, confusion, and the Depression Anxiety Stress Scale, designed to measure negative mood states, hopelessness, lack of interest, anhedonia, which means lack of pleasure, anxiety, stress, agitation, irritability, impatience with people. What do you think they found? Fact or fiction? Vegetarians tend to be, on average, more depressed, anxious, and sad. Fiction. Vegetarians report significantly less negative emotion than omnivores. Why, though? They offer two explanations. First, if you're unhealthy, if you're sick all the time, going back and forth to doctors, dealing with HMOs, of course you're going to be more irritable, stressed, depressed. So they suggest the emotional health of vegetarians may be in part a result of their superior physical health. The second reason may be arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is metabolized in the body to produce inflammatory mediators. In fact, that's how anti-inflammatory drugs like aspirin and ibuprofen work, by interfering with the conversion of arachidonic acid into compounds that produce inflammation, pain, and swelling. Where is arachidonic acid found in our diet? Here's a list of the top 10 sources in the United States. Overwhelmingly, chicken and eggs, though there's also some in beef, pork, fish, and other animal products. So maybe one reason vegetarians are, on average, so much happier, more positive, is that arachidonic acid is a key substrate for the synthesis of pro-inflammatory compounds in the body, which can adversely affect mental health via a cascade of neuroinflammation. So omnivores may be more negative, depressed, stressed, hopeless, in part because their brains are so inflamed by their diet. Endorphins are wonderful things, but there's been a long-standing concern that chili pepper ingestion may cause stomach inflammation, which could lead to bleeding, stomach cancer, but only recently have we started to get some good data. Are chili peppers bad for us? Neither good nor bad, or good for us? Are chili peppers good for you? You betcha. In fact, it may even prevent stomach irritation. Check this out. You give a drug like ibuprofen, and you can burn a hole through your stomach and start bleeding internally. But the more chilies, the less bleeding, the more stomach lining protection. The balance of evidence suggests chili peppers may actually prevent cancer, and ironically have an anti-inflammatory role within the body. Chili peppers are health-promoting foods. Dates are whole foods, but by weight are 80% pure sugar. Just to put that in perspective, Fruit Loops are only 40% sugar, half the sugar content of dates, and has fruit-shaped marshmallows, so it's got to be healthy. Straight frosting, only 60% sugar. Jelly beans, only 70% sugar. Dates, 80%. Yes, dates have fiber. They have phytonutrients. But the concern about consuming high-sugar foods is that they can raise our blood sugar, raise our triglycerides, oxidatively stress our bodies, and make us fat. So, last year, Israeli scientists took a bunch of people, stuffed them full of dates for a month, and measured what happened. Are dates bad for us? Does the sugar and fiber kind of cancel each other out, or are dates good for us? Dates are fantastic, no adverse effects on blood sugar or weight, and beneficial improvements in triglycerides and antioxidant stress levels. Check out the title of this review, Possible Best Food? Concluding dates may be considered an almost ideal food. As an aside, one date scored significantly better than the others. They're both good, but one's better. Medjool are the smaller, sweeter Halawi dates. Without a doubt, Halawi is better. Last year, we learned that there are exotic fruits that we should stay away from. What about dragon fruit? Where do you get dragon fruit from? You can get it dried at Trader Joe's. It's yummy, but is it harmful, harmless, or helpful? Helpful. We just found out this year it has all sorts of prebiotic goodies to keep our good gut bacteria happy. We know that vegetables reduce cancer risk, but what about fermented vegetables? Kimchi, a Korean dish usually made out of fermented cabbage, harmful, harmless, helpful. Harmful, potentially doubling one's risk of breast cancer, and may increase the odds of getting prostate cancer tenfold, just a spoonful a day. This is one of the studies that changed my eating habits this year. You know, it's funny, every time I come home from the medical library, my family's like, "What can't we eat now?" Or they're like, why is there parsley and everything all of a sudden? Tea is healthy. Mushrooms are healthy. What if you put them together? Kombucha tea, a fizzy fermented drink, complete with chunks of slimy fungus. Now, if you base your nutrition knowledge on the kinds of books you find in health food stores, bestsellers like Kombucha the Magical Fungus will tell you that already by the Syn Dynasty it was known and honored as a beverage with magical powers, enabling people to live forever. Given the fact that you don't tend to meet many people from the Syn Dynasty these days, not only may kombucha not give you eternal life, it apparently won't even grant you a measly 2,000 years. Never believe anything you read in health food stores. But what does the science say? Kombucha tea, harmful, just harmless, or helpful? Kombucha tea can be harmful. Published last year in the Journal of Intensive Care Medicine, kombucha may pose serious health risks. Consumption of this tea should be discouraged, as it may be associated with life-threatening lactic acidosis. This is just the latest in a series of case reports of people ending up in a coma because their blood turned to acid after drinking kombucha. How does it do that? We have no idea. Maybe it's a magical fungus after all. What about goji berries? Goji berries are fantastic, probably the healthiest dried fruit on the planet, and they're only expensive if you buy them as goji berries. Then they're ridiculous, like 20 bucks a pound. But if you instead go to an Asian market and buy them as lycium berries, then they're cheaper than raisins. So whatever you used to do with raisins, oatmeal, trail mix, whatever, now start doing with goji berries. What about licorice? The kind that's made out of actual licorice root, not the artificially flavored corn syrup stuff, so like health food store licorice. Harmful, harmless, or helpful. Licorice can be quite harmful. The natural compound that makes licorice so sweet can affect kidney function. Just 4 candy cigars for 2 weeks landed this woman in the hospital, a physician no less. She recovered completely, but others have not been so lucky. Now, there is some evidence that the same compound may be effective at killing human prostate cancer cells in a petri dish, so one could argue that these people were just eating too much of a good thing. But the safety window is so narrow. The safe upper limit of black licorice intake is 6 grams, so that's only like 6 inches of licorice, and it may be especially detrimental for pregnant women. Kids born to moms who ate a lot of licorice when pregnant suffer from diminished speech, visual, and memory skills, as well as 2 to 3 times the odds of having attention, rule-breaking, and aggression problems. It was another nutty year in nutrition, most of which we already knew. Walnuts lower our cholesterol, been there, done that. This was a little surprising. The scientific record has been crystal clear that eating nuts does not make you fat, but the Harvard Nurses study just found that eating nuts may actually help you lose weight. How? Nuts may increase our resting energy expenditure by as much as 11%, meaning those who eat nuts burn more calories just sitting, sleeping, breathing. If there was some pill that could do that, it'd be making some drug company billions of dollars. Nuts were also shown this year to suppress cancer growth, and may also decrease inflammatory markers. You eat butter, inflammation goes up. You slug down a 1/4 cup of olive oil, nothing happens other than taking in about a 1/4 day's worth of mostly empty calories, and 3 handfuls of walnuts significantly decreased inflammation. Same thing with almonds, 3 handfuls a day significantly reducing inflammation throughout the body, and 3 daily handfuls of pistachios significantly improving the function of our arteries. As one headline put it, a handful of pistachios could destroy cholesterol. We know that nuts are good for us, but what about peanut butter? Peanuts aren't actually real nuts. They're legumes. Peanut butter, harmful, harmless, or outright helpful? And the answer is helpful. Last year, a new Harvard study found that women at high risk for heart disease eating peanut butter every day had only about half the risk of suffering a heart attack compared to women who stayed away from the stuff. So even nuts that aren't even nuts are good for you. The only caveat is to watch out for nuts in your travels. An unusual case of drug-facilitated robbery reported last year in the Journal of Travel Medicine. The perpetrator employed a highly unusual and very creative method where he cut hazelnuts in half, carved them so he could implant his choice of drug, in this case a Valium-like drug called Klonopin, and then glued them back together. To overcome the unpleasant taste of the drugged hazelnuts, he mixed them with dried raisins. He then offered this mixture to fellow passengers who sat next to him during the trip. How generous these locals are! When the traveler was unconscious, he stole everything they had. But other than that, nuts are good for us. Petroleum jelly. Not to eat. People rub it inside their nostrils when their nasal membranes get dry. I know it has the dreaded P word in it, but is it harmful, harmless, or helpful? Harmful. Report last year of lipoid pneumonia, and this is not the first case. Not surprising, perhaps, since the jelly liquefies at room temperature. Physicians and patients need to be aware of the hazards and should try to stop this habit. But it's not the petroleum itself, it's the fact that you're putting any kind of oily substance in your nose, particularly at bedtime, so even the non-petroleum products should not be used this way. Vinegar is helpful, according to an examination of the anti-glycemic properties of vinegar this year. It blunts the spike in blood sugar that occurs after a meal. If you eat a piece of white bread, this is what happens over the next 3 hours to your blood sugar. But if we eat that same bread dipped in balsamic vinegar, it looks like this. Vinegar reduces postprandial glycemia by about 20% compared to placebo. How? Well, we think it's because vinegar slows down the speed at which food leaves the stomach, which is good because it can keep us feeling full longer. How much do we have to take, though? Just 2 teaspoons with a meal. There's all sorts of wild vinegars out there, pomegranate vinegar, blood orange, black fig. They're not just calorie-free, they're good for us. As I've noted in previous volumes, vitamin D deficiency remains a major problem. Even if every day we do go outside and get the 15 to 30 minutes of midday sun, the majority of North America is at such a high latitude that during the winter months the sun's rays are at such an angle that it's necessary to supplement our diet with this sunshine vitamin. There's been a suggestion, though, that instead of taking pills, it's preferable to go to a tanning salon. Well, a major review on just that topic was just published. What do you think they found? Tanning beds for vitamin D. Harmful, harmless, or helpful? Harmful. Last summer, the World Health Organization raised the carcinogen classification of tanning beds to the highest level. With evidence showing that tanning bed exposure can raise the risk of the deadliest kind of skin cancer by up to 75%, the International Agency for Research on Cancer bumped tanning beds up to a Category 1 carcinogen, along with things like asbestos, cigarettes, arsenic. OK, more skin cancer, but wouldn't the vitamin D you produce lower your risk of internal cancer so much that it would all balance out like it does with moderate sun exposure? The light produced by the sun is not the same as the light produced by tanning beds. Most tanning devices primarily emit UVA, which is relatively inefficient in stimulating vitamin D synthesis. So the health benefits can be fully disassociated from the risks with vitamin D supplementation for those unwilling or unable to get enough sunshine. For billions of years, life on the planet Earth has evolved with about 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark. We discovered fire a while ago, but have only been using candles about 5,000 years and electric lighting for only about a century. This is what the country used to look like. Then 20 years later, 20 more years, and then estimated about 20 years in the future. Our skies used to look like this. Now they look like this. The photo on the left was taken during a blackout. These days, this is the only Milky Way our children will likely ever see. But so what? Does it have an effect on our health? The light, not the candy bar. Let's find out. You may have heard that light at night increases breast cancer risk. Is this fact or fiction? Well, 2 reviews were published last year assessing the existing evidence. Electric light causes cancer. Surely you're joking. Well, let's look at the evidence. Smack dab in the middle of your brain is the pineal gland, the so-called third eye, and it's got only one function: produce melatonin in the dark. It's hooked up to our eyes, and at dawn, the gland shut down. Then at night it turns back on. That's how our internal organs know what time of day it is. They sense the level of melatonin in our bloodstream. And melatonin is thought to suppress cancer growth, kind of like putting cancer to sleep at night. Let's test the theory. If that's true, should blind women have more breast cancer or less breast cancer? Less, right? Because their pineal gland never gets turned off by the sun. And guess what? Blindness is indeed protective against breast cancer, cuts your risk in half. What about shift workers who work in the middle of the night? Increased risk, right? Melatonin production is interrupted. What if you live in a neighborhood with really bright street lights? increased risk. They took satellite photos, and the brighter neighborhoods seemed to correlate with greater breast cancer risk. Anyways, fact. But what does this have to do with nutrition? Well, last year, for the first time ever, melatonin levels and food choices were studied. The Harvard Nurses study found 2 foods significantly associated with melatonin suppression, like a bright light at night, which is bad. They looked at fruits, vegetables, nuts, bread, meat, and dairy. In which group were the offenders found? Both meat and dairy intake were associated with lower melatonin levels, which may help explain why they found that meat and dairy intake in adolescence was associated with breast cancer risk later in life. Let me end with one final topic. In 2010, we learned a lot more about aging and eating. Awarded the highest honor for scientific achievement in this country, one of the greatest biochemists of all time wrote that aging is a disease. The human lifespan simply reflects the level of free radical damage that accumulates in cells. When enough damage accumulates, cells can't survive properly anymore, and they just simply give up. First proposed in 1972, the mitochondrial theory of aging suggests that it's free radical damage to our cell's power source, known as mitochondria, that lead to a loss of cellular activity and function over time. It's a little like charging your iPod battery over and over again. Every time the capacity gets less and less. Mitochondria are like miniature blast furnaces inside our cells, where the food that we eat is converted into usable energy. In my Stopping Cancer Before It Starts DVD, I go into detail about the quantum biology of oxidative phosphorylation, but just to simplify, it is in these fireworks inside the mitochondria, where the oxygen we breathe may get a hold of an electron we ate that was pumped with energy by plants, thanks to photosynthesis, and transform that oxygen molecule into what's called superoxide, which can damage our delicate cellular machinery, oxidize our cellular machinery. Basically, we're rusting, right? That's what rust is, right? The oxidation of metal. And scientifically, aging has been considered the slow oxidation of our bodies. Like those brown age spots on the back of people's hands, that's just oxidized fat under the skin. Oxidant stress is why we get wrinkles, and why we lose some of our memory, why our organ systems break down as we get older. How do we slow down oxidation? By eating foods containing antioxidants. If you want to know if a food has a lot of antioxidants in it, you slice it open, expose it to air, expose it to oxygen, and see what happens. Does it oxidize? Does it turn brown? Think about our 2 most popular fruits, apples, bananas, turn brown right away. Not a lot of antioxidants inside there. Right? How do you keep your fruit salad from turning brown, though? Add lemon juice, right, which has vitamin C in it, an antioxidant, which can keep your food from oxidizing, can do the same thing inside our bodies. Here's the catch, though. Many antioxidants can't penetrate through the mitochondrial membrane into the mitochondria. So they can protect the rest of the cell, protect our DNA, but they can't get inside the power plants of our cells, so may be helpless to slow down the aging process. That's why our bodies have an enzyme called superoxide dismutase. It's a detoxifying enzyme within our mitochondria that neutralizes superoxide and turns it back into oxygen. Because of its bomb-diffusing role, it's considered a tumor suppressor gene, staving off cancer. It's considered neuroprotective in our brain, staving off dementia. In fact, the reason women live longer than men may be because they have superior enzymatic activity of this superoxide dismutase. This mitochondrial theory of aging has enjoyed such universal acceptance within the scientific community that there was even a paper published last year asking whether there was anything more to aging at all. OK, bottom line, how do we boost the enzyme activity of this anti-aging, anti-cancer, anti-Alzheimer's enzyme? Become a woman, or become a vegetarian. Last year, researchers compared this enzyme's activity in omnivores versus vegetarians. This is your superoxide dismutase enzyme activity if you're over 85. Now, if you're younger, the enzyme may work a little better, but when one eats vegetarian, it works a lot better. Eating vegetarian appears to boost this anti-aging enzyme's activity 300%, a threefold increase in the expression of the superoxide dismutase gene in the vegetarian group compared to the omnivore control group. We had no idea. No wonder vegetarians live longer. No wonder they have less cancer and cardiovascular disease. Right? We just never tested them for this enzyme before. A higher enzyme expression at the genetic level, thus a better defense against superoxide radicals, might be expected as a consequence of a vegetarian diet. So maybe that's why lower rates of cancer and chronic cardiovascular disease compared to omnivores. Yes, we eat more phytonutrients, but the higher protection against chronic disease in vegetarians may also be explained by what's called epigenetic changes. You think you're just born with genes and stuck with them? No. We now know that what we eat can turn on and off gene expression, and in this case, eating vegetarian seems to significantly boost the activity of one of the most important workhorse enzymes in the body. Dr. Ornish published an editorial in the American Journal of Cardiology last year that I think really sums up where we are, describing a growing convergence of scientific evidence that an optimal diet is mostly plant-based. Make sure it has nuts, soy, and fiber, and you can drop your bad cholesterol as much as taking drugs every day for the rest of your life, but without the cost and without the side effects. Save the country $20 billion. Of course, most patients aren't even given the plant-based option because of the patronizing belief among doctors that no one will actually do it. But in reality, most people don't want to take the drugs. People hate the side effects, they don't make you feel any better, and it's scary popping pills every day so you don't keel over and die. People don't even want to think about it. However, when people actually improve their diets, you actually feel so much better so quickly that it reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying, which is usually not sustainable, to joy of living, which often is. And the diet doesn't just help your cholesterol. Unlike the drugs, a plant-based diet can also prevent and treat diabetes, hypertension, obesity, prostate cancer, breast cancer, etc. Pills can't do all that. And instead of being on a list of medications, one drug for this one or two drugs for that, there's not one diet for heart disease, another one for diabetes. A plant-based diet covers all the bases. Why? Because plant-based foods contain more than 100,000 different disease-preventing nutrients. Let me say that again, 100,000 phytonutrients only found in plants. Blueberries have the anthocyanins for memory, tomatoes are rich in the red pigment lycopene, which targets heart disease and cancer, ginger, you got gingerols for hypertension, pomegranates have totally different phytonutrients, and let's never forget kale. The list goes on and on. And you can't just take these phytonutrients in a pill. Beta-carotene pills may actually increase cancer risk, as opposed to the whole carrot, which may lower our risk. And we probably couldn't swallow 100,000 pills a day anyway. Then he talks about his work stopping and reversing the progression of even severe coronary artery disease, slowing, stopping, or reversing cancer. Living and eating healthy actually changes you on a genetic level, upregulating disease-preventing genes and downregulating genes that promote breast cancer, prostate cancer, inflammation, and oxidative stress. Drugs can't do that. The bottom line: people tend to think of breakthroughs in medicine as new drugs, lasers, high-tech surgery, but they have a hard time believing that simple choices can be as powerful as drugs and surgery, but they often are, sometimes even better. And I will leave you on that note. If you missed any previous volumes of my latest in nutrition series, which cover another 200 topics or so, multivitamins, alcohol, all the big controversies, you can go to my website or humanesociety.org/nutrition, where 100% of the proceeds will go straight to an organization I'm incredibly proud to work for, the Humane Society of the United States.